I'm Myrna Lorline. I'm here with the League of Women Voters, as you know, and we welcome you to this League Forum. Let me tell you a little bit about how this will go tonight. We have made available to you yellow cards, which apparently some of you have been busy using. We will give those cards to our question sorters. The question sorter's job is to make sure that the questions are on topic, appropriate to a forum, and that we don't have a lot of repeats, and also to be sure that I can read them. So they're very helpful to us in that regard. The folks at this table are timers. They help us stay on track. We will be allowing 2 minutes for opening statements and 2 minutes for responses tonight, and they will let the candidates know when we're getting close to that time frame. Our forum is being recorded by Robin Cash, thank you Robin, from Neighborhood Network News, and will be available at lwvlinkcounty.org and www.neighborhoodnetworknews.com on those websites. Please turn off your cell phones, as I believe I will check mine. Or any other thing that might ping or make a noise while we are having our forum tonight. If you can't hear any of us during the forum, let us know and we will speak up. At all league forums, we treat all participants with respect. We never ask personal questions. We ask that you hold any applause you might have, and then that you kindly offer that applause at the end of our closing statements in appreciation for the time our candidates have given us tonight. Go ahead and submit questions you may have during the forum. You can just hold up the paper you may have written them on, or if you need paper, hold up your hand and someone will bring some to you. Yes, we have lots. So let's begin with our opening statements. We have 2-minute opening statements, and we'll begin with, let's begin with Ms. Running-Marquardt.
Thank you very much for that. I am Kirsten Running-Marquardt. I'd like to start by thanking the League of Women Voters for putting this forum on. What you do is not always appreciated by everyone, and but it is needed not only in our democracy, but on some of these local races that may not have had the opportunity to have some sort of sit-down debate where we can discuss issues. I'd also like to thank the Ladd Library, which I'm very proud of. The percentage of usage here at the Ladd Library, we desperately needed an extension office over here on this side of town, and I'm very proud that we're able to use that and the assistance they provide people on the west side of Cedar Rapids. I've been a state representative. I'm running for my 4th term, and being a state representative has been the greatest honor of my life. In service to others, and especially serving the people, whether it's passing legislation that's fair and reasonable, working across the aisle. I do my best to put Iowans first, and Iowans are my priority, and I look forward to this forum and this debate, and with that, I'm done with my opening. I think I made my 2 minutes.
You still have 37 seconds.
But you are not required to fill them in.
Okay.
Mr. Henderson.
Joshua Henderson. I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters, being raised by women. I understand and appreciate women more so than, I guess, a lot of male counterparts would. I'd also like to thank the library. Growing up on this side of town, we didn't have the library over on this side of town. We had to go over on the southeast side. I served 12 years in the Marine Corps. Selfless service. It's nothing new to me. Single father, raising my daughter, special needs. And I look forward to meeting and speaking with every single one of you after this, later down the line.
Thank you. Thank you. let's get right started with our questions. We have a number of questions about childcare, and several people have given us a number of numbers to think about when we're thinking about childcare. One of our questioners says 74% of Iowa voters support changing the way child care assistance works. One voter reminded us that it is in early childhood that 90% of brain development takes place. I'm not sure of any of these numbers, I'm just passing them along. And other people have noted that a quarter of Iowans live in areas that don't have licensed child care options. What is your plan to address the need for child care? And let's start with Mr. Henderson.
Well, just recently I ran into an issue with childcare. First off, the affordability. A lot of people are working just to be able to afford childcare, first off. Finding out that even if you don't take the child into childcare, in order to maintain that spot, you still have to pay. That's a little ridiculous. So a little bit of regulation to prevent that would help mitigate some of that cost. Assistance with maybe daycare, after-school programs. Might be a little bit more beneficial versus babysitters, because not all the time that you're going to have a teenager that's going to know how to do CPR or know how to take care of somebody with special needs.
Thank you. Ms. Running-Marquardt.
I think this is a really important question for several reasons. Childcare is it's usually like number one, number two, number three sometimes in issues that working families face. They're being outpriced. They can't afford the quality childcare that they desperately need and want for their children. And it's a workforce development issue on a couple different aspects. One, we need to be investing in more people who are looking at the child care as a employment opportunity or a career in child care. We also need to do a good job of, when we want to attract young people to the state and keep the ones that we have here, we need to have quality, affordable child care available to them. One piece of legislation language that I was able to get through in a bipartisan way was making it easier for people who previously, if you needed child care assistance through the state, you're only allowed to either be going to school or to be working part-time to receive that assistance, or it's not part-time, excuse me, to be employed and receive that assistance. And you couldn't do both. And so there were people who wanted to work and still go to school. And so the language, and I had met with different parents and different people who were using the child care assistance program or who had just opted out of it. And they said that was a definite barrier for them. And so I took those concerns and worked with a couple other legislators, and we worked together to find a solution and find language that would make it more flexible, Iowa child care assistance for those who were working and going to school. And it might not seem like something that's so important here, but it means everything to those families now who are able to go to school and increase their economic opportunities in the future. I've also been a supporter of Early Childhood Iowa. And Early Childhood Iowa, it's a wide array of different programs, but and we can talk about that later. Thank you.
On the other side of that question, we have a questioner who brings up the childcare workforce that you mentioned, Ms. Running-Marquardt. What ideas would you have to develop that workforce? There is good information that many of the people who work in that workforce make below poverty wages. So what ideas might you have for that side of the problem? We'll start with you.
Great. Thank you for the question again. Workforce development is an issue that I'm passionate about. I'm the ranking member of the economic development budget, where we work with the budgets for economic development, workforce development, and cultural affairs. Part of the things that we not only work with people who are working with childcare issues, but workforce issues, and there's different things that we can do. We have a shortage of childcare workers, but we need to make sure that we're looking at, are we paying people fairly here in the state of Iowa? There's been several attempts to raise the minimum wage. Lynn County, and I supported them through local control, we're trying to raise the minimum wage. People who are caring for our children sometimes can't afford to have their children cared for. And that is wrong, and we need to change that. Not only that, but there are different things that we can do at the state level. We can look at incentives. We can encourage private companies if they want to receive assistance from the state of Iowa, then they have to address quality and affordable child care for the people that are working at their jobs. It's just sort of treating child care professionals like the professionals they are. And there's a balance in there of training, looking at different mentorship programs, apprenticeship programs, and we're talking about Future Ready Iowa. I think we can move that and see what we can do to put funding behind that to develop our child care, those who work in the child care industry. If we don't, we're going to have large troubles here, because we will try to attract people to come to the state of Iowa, but they don't have a good quality place for their children. And that's an issue, one of the top issues that we're going to be facing in the state. And we're not facing this issue in 10 or 15 or 20 years. We're facing this issue now. And so I will continue to work hard to not only treat child care professionals like the professionals they are, but make sure that our children are in a quality atmosphere.
Thank you. Mr. Henderson.
Piggyback off of Ms. Running-Marquardt. I'd say create an incentive for the bigger companies, and then an even bigger incentive for the locally owned smaller businesses to help create, within their own company, a small program where they have their own daycare within their own company. Kind of what Rockwall Collins is doing. They have their own childcare. Maybe give them a little tax break. Rockwall Collins has already got a massive tax break. Give them a little one, create a bigger incentive. Hey, maybe we should expand this. Smaller companies, that helps them out a little bit more. They'll be able to expand, hire on more people. Like my mom, she owns a smaller company. All of us have kids. There's 10 people on there. One of them has 5 kids. That would be a big incentive. So, just throwing out ideas that just would create revenue within the company, and then expanding, and then hiring on more people, creating more jobs.
All right, thank you. Let's switch to the other end of the education spectrum now. We have a question about higher education. What would you do to maintain quality in higher education in Iowa and make it economically accessible to students? Probably very much the same question, but on the other end of the education spectrum.
We read the first, I apologize, the first part of that
What would
question.
you do to maintain quality in higher education in Iowa and to make it economically accessible? Mr. Henderson.
College education it's not always a guarantee. For me, it wasn't a guarantee. That's one of the reasons why I joined the military. I got my bachelor's degree while I was in the military, and I still have 2 years left on my Montgomery GI Bill for my master's. We actually have a contract with the University of Iowa, and some of the maintenance people have actually said that this is a nonprofit school. When I brought that up, they laughed. Well, the University of Iowa is supposed to be a nonprofit school. If they're laughing at that, how are any of our students going from high school to college going to ever be able to afford it if the tuition costs keep going up? One of the things that I am a big advocate on is moving more towards what Colorado did, but in baby steps. Legalizing marijuana. It's the end game, not immediately. Using that tax revenue, turning around, creating a program for all graduates with a certain GPA and assisting them in getting an education. We have to invest in them just as they have to invest in themselves.
Thank you. Ms. Running-Marquardt.
It really comes down to what your priorities are, and you can tell from the budgets that you have. And the last 7 years, the University of Iowa, the regents of the community colleges have been decreased in the appropriations that they have been given by the state. And what does it do then? It makes the regents have to increase the tuition and prices out some Iowa students from the education that they deserve. What really concerns me is our regents and community colleges are some of the best economic drivers we have in the state of Iowa. Paired with across the country right now, there's $1.4 trillion in student loan debt. We cannot afford to have our children, on average, with tens of thousands of dollars of student loan debt to try to come and start a career and stay here in Iowa with the wages that we pay. So I see the Regents community colleges as, some of the best investments, not only for our state, but for our future. They drive our economy. They attract people from all across the country. And, another way to look at this as well, higher education is critically important to me. I think we need to do a better job of partnering with apprenticeship programs in high school. This is especially union apprenticeship programs, well-established ones that we have here in our community and all across the state. And then also working harder to make sure that we have people who can get credit in high school as well, college credit, and advancing those programs and making that a bigger opportunity for more Iowa students. So I think it's budgeting our priorities to make sure that the higher education, like the Regents and the community colleges, are priorities, but then it's also looking at lifetime learning for all Iowa children. Thank you.
Thank you. What proposals do you have for higher education? Oh, I mixed up, aren't I? Public education. Public education. The next question is, what proposals do you support to improve public education given the budget environment?
Public education, currently, the amount of money that they're spending isn't enough. That slow process that I was talking about, Kirsten and I had actually talked about this a while back, the medical marijuana bill that you guys had passed. And expanding on that, using that tax revenue and assisting with the K through 12 education. But first, you cannot segregate people with that bill. You have them marked down as felons are not allowed access to medical marijuana. Right right now, the Democrats and Republicans are both blaming each other, and honestly, we sent them both up there to work together and come up with a solution that will benefit all Iowans, not just themselves. Thank you.
Thank you. The question was, what proposals do you support to improve public education given the budget environment?
The problem we have, unfortunately, with public education is that the last 7 to 9 years, we've been on a decline for the amount that we're appropriating for our public schools. The last 2 years, it's been 1 to 1.1% SSA, or previously it was called allowable growth. That does not even cover cost of living, inflation, any of that for our schools. And what our schools are now facing in a tenured period from 2007 to 2017, the free and reduced lunch program, 31 to 41, so it increased 10% of the percentage of children that could qualify for free and reduced lunch. The English as a second language ELL programs in our state, those have also increased dramatically across the state of Iowa. And so it is very difficult when the state does not put in its fair share. And we are working with school districts that are running extremely tight budgets. They have to come up with that somewhere. And instead of schools and school districts and teachers thinking about and being innovative, coming up, teaching with new technologies, working on new collaborations and new partnerships in the classroom. Instead, they're worrying about, is this child going to make it, and other factors that take place when we don't adequately fund our schools. And so I look forward to the day when we can adequately fund our schools. We can do it. We can be fiscally responsible at adequately funding our schools. We can get rid of some of the corporate tax cuts, giveaways, unforgivable loans that are just handed out like candy. And we can actually have a budget that funds our priorities. And public education is, I believe, a right to every single Iowa child, and it should be funded as an appropriate priority. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Henderson?
I think he started.
Okay, I'm going to take a breath now. That's going to be really good. Healthcare. What would you do to provide health care for all Iowans? They have a right to good, affordable health care. What would you do to provide that?
Honestly, open it up to where other insurance companies, besides the ones that we have available right now, and definitely get rid of the MCO, because I just took my daughter in for an IQ test, and as many of you can tell, she's 7 years old. Not much that she can do, and that was $1,800 to find out that she's intellectually severely disabled in 25 minutes that the state just paid for. She's supposed to have that every 3 years. Another 600,000 severely disabled Iowans. We got to go back to state Medicaid, but first we got to fix what was broken with it. Open it up to other insurance companies. See which ones. If you open it up, it's just going to provide competition, and it'll lower the prices.
Thank you. Ms. Running-Marquardt.
Thank you. This is a huge question, and so to have just 2 minutes to try to work on answering it somehow seems impossible. But previously, for several years, I was director of Iowans for Healthcare, and at that time, we were working to help the state as they implemented the Hawkeye program, which provided health care for children in the state of Iowa, affordable and accessible health care. in the form of Medicaid. And, you know, from there, there's been, unfortunately, we've come from the ACA, and that has been severely eroded at the federal level, and then it began to be, the access to healthcare has been eroded at the state capital level. And what ends up happening now is I had a chance to talk to the insurance commissioner just recently. He came to the an event that we were having, and I sat down and talked to him. I kind of had a long list of things, and one of them, his concern was that we don't have a place for all those people who are being outpriced for who were on the ACA in the state of Iowa now, and they just don't have anywhere they can go, and they don't have affordable health care. And that's a problem, not only because of their quality of life, but it costs our whole entire community as well. And it's not fair. I do consider healthcare as a right. I think that the MCOs, it is a crime what they're doing. We went from administrated by the state of Iowa at 3 to 4% administrative costs to administer the Medicaid program, but instead now we're at privatized Medicaid, and they can receive up to 17% off of healthcare costs from the state of Iowa. We have no oversight. I fought tirelessly for that, and we can get into MCOs here in a bit. But the other thing that, you know, we need to look at, not only fixing the Medicaid mess, but what, you know, there's been a couple other things as well that we can look at, going back to different kinds of pooling for medical access, and then also stop the erosion of people who are trying to provide plans in the state of Iowa that do not allow for pre-existing conditions. That is
We're going to
inhumane.
have to stop there.
Okay.
Thank you, but we
Thank
have a
you.
related question.
Okay.
And that is, what would you do to preserve mental health resources in Iowa? And then a second part, what do you do as a community leader to destigmatize mental health for Cedar Rapids?
Did you say reserve? I can.
Sorry. What can you do to preserve mental health resources in Iowa? And what measures do you do to try to destigmatize mental health issues? So preserve mental health resources and deal with stigma.
Well, when we're talking about preserving, unfortunately, we've cut 2 mental health institutes in the state of Iowa. We have law enforcement that continues to drive around county to county, hospital to hospital, trying to find somewhere so people have access to mental health treatment. And it is a travesty and it is shame, and it's not how we treat people here in the state of Iowa. I will continue to try to work with whoever will work with me to try to find real solutions. There was a bill that was passed. I supported it. It was a baby step, not only in children's mental health access, but adult mental health access. But it was more committee meetings, studies, and forums, and those types of things, when we need a real solution. It's very interesting to me that we close down mental health institutes, and then all of a sudden we say, oh, we got a problem, well, let's have a study about it. That's not how we should treat Iowans. Some Iowans passed away because of that shameful, not only closure, but the way that they treated people in the state of Iowa. And then the last question was, what are we going to do to preserve? We are not adequately funding mental health services in the state of Iowa, hands down right now. So I think if we say preserve, we need to look about more than preserving. I think we need to look at what we need to do to make sure that people are getting the mental health treatments that they need. Not only through the regional delivery areas, but also a children's mental health access safety net.
The last question was to destigmatize mental health care, and you have 30 seconds left. Would you like to address that? The second half of the question.
Sure. That happens through education, and it also is a cultural shift as well that we need to do. Mental health, it's a very important issue. We talk about it, not only in public forums, but we talk about it when we're discussing other issues as well, because it's such a,
too much to talk about.
It's such an important topic. I know.
We'll try to come back to it. I'm going to put it over here.
To have 30 seconds to talk about mental health issues in the state of Iowa, what you're going to do
is just too little.
Is
Yeah.
insane. But this is in many ways a related question, and this would be Mr. Henderson first. The budget How would you balance the state budget when revenues are less than expenditures?
I wouldn't have gone anyhow, but we would have waited.
Okay. All right, Mr. Henderson.
We aren't preserving anything with mental health. We're losing that battle. Funding. I don't know the name of the hospital. They just closed down a wing. I seen it in the Des Moines Register. They just closed down their mental health wing. The 2 hospitals since I've been back closed down. I've been diagnosed with PTSD. My psychiatrist has to give the VA 90 days notice before he's able to take a vacation. Normally it's 2 weeks. There's only one other for all of Lynn County. That's just veterans. So how much of a shortage are we on? Creating a program maybe to retain some of the educated psychiatrists, psychologists. That'd be a good step to destigmatize everything. Education. Not every veteran, every individual that's been diagnosed with some type of mental illness is going to go crazy. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll let you go first on the next question then, the budget. What would you do to balance the state budget when revenues are less than expenditures? And they'd like you to think about the other side. What would you do should revenues exceed expenditures?
I'm going to reverse that. If revenues exceed expenditures, honestly, it needs to go towards the kids first. Education. Period. If they're funded well enough, then it just needs to go into savings. That's it. Period. For a rainy day. Because eventually, we're going to be back in the same situation we're at right now. So, basically, turn around. We're going to have to find places at the State House to cut. I don't think they need to keep printing on paper bills and everything else. They have this great thing called technology and computers and tablets. Oh, hey. Put it right in front of you. Read it. You don't need this whole freaking stack of paper. Save money there. Turn around. What'd they spend to move the office? $170,000. I moved my room myself. Moving an office, that's a little, pardon my language, dumb. Thank you.
Ms. Running-Marquardt.
I think I've served on appropriations for 9 years, and we look at every single dollar that goes out. We look at it with a fine-tooth comb, and that's what the people of Iowa deserve. Unfortunately, on the flip side of that, through tax credits and research and development grants that are just sort of checks that are given without any accountability, those sort of things on the expenditure sort of side of our budget, every single dollar is not accounted for in the way that Iowans deserve to have that money looked at. And so I think that we need to have, when we're doing our budgeting process, we also need to be at the same time and in the same full picture, looking at all of the ways that Iowans taxpayer money is being given to in a break to some of these major corporations that do not need those tens of millions of dollars in credits to stay here in the state of Iowa. It's being fiscally responsible for appropriations and then also expenditures on the tax credit side of things as well. And we have to do a better job at that. The state of Iowa also has this committee that was formed. It's a tax credit review committee. My first year, they put it into place so that it would start the next year. The Republicans took over the next year, and it was supposed to meet once a year during the off-term or off-session time. And it was supposed to go and look through all the credits and the, forgivable loans that happen. And, but unfortunately, that committee can do better, in my humble opinion. And I look forward to the day where we can work together to have language, to have real results. One or two might come off, tax credits people aren't really using, but I think we need to make some tough decisions about what credits or research development grants really are impacting Iowa's economy in a positive light. And I think that's the fair and balanced way to do that, and be fiscally responsible with our priorities.
All right, well, here's another question about priorities, and that certainly involves spending. We'll start with you again, Ms. Running-Marquardt. It's about the environment. How would you propose to pay for fully funding the water quality bill? How would you pay for that?
I think people are missing on the water quality bill. It was a several year tied to other budgets. If we fund, the REAP budget or the DNR budget and a couple other places where they were getting that money, that's where that money was going to be coming from in the future. And so it's not as if we allocated all of that money right up front. There's different ways to look at that as well. But the issue I have is that we're really not making a good investment when we have no oversight for the things that have been prescribed for water quality investment. We have nothing that we can base results off of. We have nothing where they can come back and say, Iowans spent $100 million on this, and these are the results that we've had. Either we had clean water or we didn't. And I really think people who are working in the water quality area in the state of Iowa, and that's everybody, it's the cities, it's the farmers, it's rural, it's urban, that they understand that we want to have information, evidence-based information that deals with real numbers, and not to shame somebody or say, point at them and saying something negative about what they're doing, but to see what works, to see what doesn't work, and to see where we should be in the future putting investments into water quality. It's such an important issue for not only the state of Iowa, but for our children. And for us to say, the bills that have gone through where they refuse to put any accountability language in for the water quality initiatives is just beyond me. We also need to do a better job of tying the water quality initiatives with watersheds, because those people have been working for decades in the state of Iowa on looking at not only water quality issue, but a cousin flood mitigation issues as well. And we need to make sure that we're using all of those resources and collaborating to the best of our ability.
Thank you. Mr. Henderson, water quality.
I agree with Ms. Running-Marquardt. Accountability is key. However, I cannot remember who it was that had a recent oil spill. And I cannot remember how much they had to pay in a fine. But I can guarantee you it's not enough for how much it has impacted the environment. And I can guarantee that that money probably didn't go directly to that local environment. Creating a higher fine for transporting petroleum products, everything else, transporting through it. If it spills, wrecks, what have you, and it destroys the water, ends up in the environment, spills off the roadways, ends up into a cornfield, the fine should be increased, honestly. It'll help out with the environment, trying to pay to help with the water quality, help with the environment, help with the loss of crops, and just help out locally, to be honest with you. The pipeline I was completely against that coming through. Honestly, I think more needs to be done. And accountability is first place to go.
Thank you. This person is asking about the sales tax to pay for the Natural Resources Trust Fund, but perhaps this would be a good time to talk about the sales tax in addition to that. So what comments do you have on perhaps using the sales tax either to replace the Natural Resources Trust Fund or to using the sales tax to fund government in general? Mr. Henderson.
Honestly, I couldn't answer that right now.
All right. Ms. Running-Marquardt.
I do appreciate Joshua Henderson saying he agrees with me often, and I hope that my husband, who's in the audience today, can maybe give me that as many as I agrees. I'm just teasing, trying to make it a little lighthearted in here today. In all seriousness, the people of the state of Iowa voted overwhelmingly to increase the sales tax for natural resources and conservation policies. The state of Iowa has, I believe, just a couple years left to vote on how we're going to do that. And if we're going to do that, the will of the legislature has not been there these past several years after it was voted on statewide. I have a problem at times with sales tax because it is a regressive tax. And that's where I have difficulty with it. There's a lot of sales tax where, I see and I'm friends with, and I'm a middle class mom myself, and you have your family budget and you do what you can to budget that. I also know people who they're budgeting and living day to day, and people who go up to get that gallon of milk or diapers that they need for their children, and maybe they're 50 cents short for what they brought up to the register. I see that, and those are the people that I think of every time somebody wants to bring up a sales tax. And so I really take that into consideration and feel that that's something that we should be balancing. We could, in a fair and reasonable and fiscally responsible way, make sure that our environment is something that should be protected and cared for future generations. But instead, it keeps getting lumped on. We don't ever fully fund REAP. We don't ever give the DNR the tools that they really need. And the environment and conservation practices should be something that are more of a priority. So it is a balance with
Okay, we have
the sales tax with those programs.
related question. And this question is specifically about flooding. We'll start with Ms. Running-Marquardt. The Cedar River is flooding yet again. What ideas do you have to incentivize farmers and municipalities? And now they want us also to address the issue of runoff in the watershed area. So what ideas to deal with flooding and what ideas to deal with runoff?
So ideas to work with flooding and runoff. I and others have been working on this issue for a very long time. I was the lead Democrat in the House when we passed the Growth Reinvestment Act, which helped the state put in, it's going to be about over $300 million in captured sales tax that the city of Cedar Rapids gets to take, and that's what the state is putting in for flood control on both sides of the river. And without that piece, we wouldn't be able to have adequate flood protection for Cedar Rapids for both sides of the river. That was very important to me. We've also had a lot of other things that I've worked on. The one thing, and I worked with Ron Corbett when he was mayor of Cedar Rapids quite a bit on this issue, working upstream, working on watershed management, incentivizing watershed to collaborate and work together. The way that we do things is a bit different over in eastern Iowa. I know that Des Moines had a lawsuit dealing with sort of some of their water quality issues. They had tried to go and work with, city and rural working together. But we also, over here in eastern Iowa, we went and talked to farmers and said, when it gets this high, X, Y, and Z, can you hold this much water on your land? And we will help, and we will invest, and we will have contracts with you to do that sort of thing. And I think that took a lot of work. Every day I drive over the river several times a day, and right now the Cedar River and the Iowa River are just so high, and it just makes you, ugh. And I have those moms and dads and people I know who live down by the river who, you you just hope and pray and that things hold. And today I just came from the contractors meeting for the flood wall, where the lines on both sides of the river, those are places.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. McCoy.
Sorry.
Mr. Henderson, do you have some ideas about flooding or runoff?
Honestly, she hit the nail on the head. I don't know if I'd go in doing the runoff into the farmers' fields, because then that's just going to create more costs for us investing in the farmers. On top of that, they may also be able to get federal funding because of the lost crops, as well as the money that we'd be giving them. However, I guarantee that there are other options available. Widening the river is a possibility. Growing up, they used to dredge the Cedar River. They don't do it anymore. There's got to be other options that we can think of besides throwing the rest of the water inside the farmer's fields.
Thank you. This is a kind of a change of topic now. A question about funding, of course, but the justice system. Iowa's prisons and courts have been reduced for several years. What are your comments about fully funding our courts and funding our prisons? Particularly, this person is concerned about safety in prisons and access to the courts. What do you feel about funding our legal system, Mr. Henderson?
A friend of mine just retired out of the Anamosa State Correctional Facility. Another one of them just left, and I actually have a family member that's still working there. The safety, it's a real issue. They have issues with cameras. They have issues with personnel. They're outmanned. Funding them. It should be it needs to be a priority. First, let's try and create something to keep the individuals out. We're a nation of second chances. The individuals getting out, they need to, first off, they need to get their rights back. Their voting rights. That'd be a quick step. The city just passed a law where they're not allowed to ask if they're a felon. I think maybe we should bring that to the state level. That'd be a that's the second chance they get. I mean, working, being able to vote, being a part of the community, that's the opportunity that they need to succeed. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Running-Marquardt.
Thank you. It really is truly justice delayed is justice denied. In our court system, it's taking longer and longer to have people have their day in court, and it is putting people's rights on hold. And that, I believe, is criminal. There have been some people that I work with who have a fierce opposition to the court system here in the state of Iowa, unfortunately. And that's not how I see it. We have been cutting the justice system, court system, for many years, and it puts public safety at risk, let alone the lives of people who are working in our prison, corrections, and judicial branches of government. And they are working for us to make us safer, and we aren't giving them the tools or the resources that they need to uphold justice. They're something small, but I believe something that's very important. In the workforce development budget, I have fought year after year to uphold minimum line item spending, line item appropriations for our offender reentry program. When we put every dollar we put in offender reentry program, and that program is getting them to communicate with workforce development on job opportunities that are available for them to get them in the workforce. When we do that, recidivism rates drop dramatically for these people who have a job, who can support their families. And I want to look at not only the tax dollars we save in that, but the quality of life that we can bring people. And so it's the judicial courts, justice system, budgets, and those who work in there. It's a very large topic. It's a thankless job. I appreciate what they do every day to keep us safe and our community safe. Thank you.
Thank you. This person has questions about youth violence. What would you suggest to address racial and income disparities in Lynn County? This person thinks that might be contributing to youth violence. What would you do to address racial and income disparities in Lynn County? And we'll start with Ms. Running-Marquardt.
One thing I would do is I wouldn't close schools that are in areas that are low to middle income levels. You have children who can walk to their schools currently, and when you close those schools, things that happen, crime rates go up in those areas. Those children also only have one chance to be bused to school, so they don't have as many opportunities to do before and after school programs or before and after school activities, which are critical for many of our children here across our community. There's things like that we need to do to address those issues. What was the rest of the question?
What would you do to address racial and income disparities?
Yeah, especially on the income disparities piece, the Cedar Rapids area, across the state of Iowa especially, when we have 41% of our children in our schools that can qualify for free and reduced lunches, and I watch every single, you can break it out by school district, by zip code. I watch that, and I know that those kids, not only maybe school is the one chance that they get to eat, but they also have other problems that come along with that in their day. And there's things that we need to do. If we can provide adequate schooling, if they're able to go to the doctor when they're sick, if their parents are able to provide food on the table to feed them, these are things that all have to do with being employed and not being underemployed, and being paid a living wage so that you can have a quality of life if you work a full-time job here, that you have time for your children, and you and your children can have a quality life. And that's the kind of Iowa that I want, and that's the kind of Iowa that I've worked hard for and hope to continue to work hard for in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Henderson. What would you do to address racial and income disparities, differences?
I guess I'm going to do the racial part, sorry.
Education. Sit down and actually have a conversation. Growing up, in elementary school, I went to Johnson. I grew up in Wellington Heights. Very little has changed. I've had the same best friend who happens to be a different race than I am since kindergarten. still talk to this day. If people actually sit down and talk, you'd be surprised what you actually have in common. So that's the racial inequality. When it comes to the financial inequality, honestly, education, mentorship programs, after-school programs, for everybody, male, female, what have you, would benefit everybody. A buddy of mine does basketball for at-risk youth. Most of his kids now, they're not so much at risk, and he's benefiting from it for himself. Thank you.
Thank you. We do have one more question about diversity, and this is diversity in general. Do you have some plans or ideas on what we might do to represent diverse populations in this district? Mr. Henderson, diversity in general.
Very broad question. The only thing I can think of is just get out and enjoy your community, talk to the people. Door knocking, I talk to more people than I think I have in my entire Marine Corps career, which is actually quite a bit. But I think I was invited to like 3 or 4 dinners, a couple barbecues. We've gotten away from the whole community aspect, where the neighbors would come over. Oh, these guys just moved in. Oh, here's a blueberry pie. Here's some banana nut bread. Bringing it over, saying hi, getting to know your neighbor. We've gotten away from that. No community aspect anymore. No community relationships. Everybody's huddled in their own house, playing on Facebook, playing on their phones, playing on their computers, sitting in front of their TV. More community involvement. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Running-Marquardt, diversity in general.
Diversity in general, a couple things. The state of Iowa a few years ago initiated balance based on gender and as a way to encourage diversity on boards and commissions across the state of Iowa. Recently, that has come under attack because people just say, oh, it's just too hard to have that happen in our community. And, and in some of those communities, I challenge them because I know there are capable people who don't all look alike to be able to serve who want to serve their communities, women, men, and people of color as well. A way that we can, at the state level, in Iowa is rare, I believe we're only one of maybe 2 states that do this, is have a minority impact statement for different policy bills that we have that come before us. And so we can see how that policy affects minority communities across the state of Iowa. Is it fair? Is it just? And I read those, and I know other people do too, not everybody, but when I look at policy, it's not only the policy, the page, how much it costs, but also how does this impact the lives of Iowans, and is it impacting Iowans fairly? That's something that I look at when I look at all pieces of legislation. The other thing that we can do, volunteer work that I have done, and a part of my community as well, is working with not only refugees but immigrant populations here in the Cedar Rapids area through different volunteer work that I have. And I went to one meeting one time, and I said thank you for being a part of Iowa's great future. We have a workforce development shortage, and we need to have sort of a culture shift at looking at, of course, making sure that Iowans have the skills they need, but then also welcoming in new Iowans to the state of Iowa, because we need them if we're going to have a bright economic future for not only ourselves, but our children. Thank you.
Thank you. This question might be a little narrower and perhaps a little easier to get a hold of. Speed cameras. Should Iowa put speed cameras on its highways, including interstates, Ms. Running-Marquardt?
Well, they just had the court decision that allowed for it again. Cedar Rapids is waiting to see if they're going to allow the ones that are on the interstate to go back on or not. But the problem I have with some of these cameras, and I know we've had legislation afterward as well to try to address privacy issues, is that we haven't really addressed the where does it end? You can think of scenarios that talk about if you have a city, I'm not saying this is possible, but or anytime soon here, but if you have a city that has on every street lamp a camera, and if you don't get your sidewalk cleared within 5 hours after a snow, and they take a picture of it, is that something that's ticket worthy? And there just is such a large ability to expand all that, and I'm not sure if as as a citizen, and I'm a bit libertarian streak in myself, that I don't believe that government needs to be in your life at all the time, every time. The thing with the cameras on 380 is that they have proven to make the area safer and have saved lives. I believe that. There have been some other areas, though, where traffic cameras have been placed across the state of Iowa where it really sincerely looks like it's a revenue-generating camera and not necessarily there for the public safety benefit for all Iowans. So I tread lightly with the safe traffic cameras. They're not my favorite. I'm not a traffic camera cheerleader for them. I do see where they do serve their purpose at times, but we have to make sure that it doesn't expand into areas that will violate people's privacy and common sense as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Henderson?
If it serves its purpose, I'm for it. However, there's problems with the ones on the 380. They have the ones out in California where they're not only taking a picture of your license plate, they're taking a picture of the individual that's driving the car. Say your kid's old enough to drive.
Not yet.
Borrows your car. Who's getting the ticket?
Yeah, 5 more years.
Who's getting the ticket though? You are. See what I'm saying? So with that, you'd be able to take him in. The ticket would be readjusted into his name. He would have to pay for it. Instead of just saying, oh, we're just going to blanket it and give the individual that owns the vehicle the ticket. So adjusting the cameras that they have on the 380 to be able to see who the actual driver is, then yes, I'm for that.
Thank you. Thank you. This is a question about voting rights. This person reminds us there have been several pieces of legislation regarding voting, I think probably one notably, in the state of Iowa. This person thinks that this legislation may have made voting more difficult for certain populations. What would you do to address the legislation, the recent legislation we've had on voting? Let's leave it there, on voting, and then we have another question about voting rights. But what would you do, what is your position on voter ID and the other legislation we've had regarding voting?
That's first.
Mr. Henderson.
Okay. Honestly, everybody deserves the right to vote. I'd be willing to give it a try if it inhibits people's right to vote, then I'd be willing to rectify the situation by getting rid of it. If it doesn't and it's been proven to actually work to where, okay, the individuals that have the right to vote, have their IDs and everything else, and it works and it prevents voter fraud, then I'm for it. But as soon as it starts preventing people from being able to vote, no, I'm completely against it. Everybody deserves the right to vote that is able to vote.
Thank you. Ms. Running-Marquardt.
So this is a very tough question, I guess, because for me, it's really black and white. The voter ID laws that was passed was an absolute suppression, a voting suppression piece of legislation that came through. And who is being suppressed by this vote? It's people with disabilities. It is minority communities. It's transient communities. It's our very old and our very young voters. And it discourages them from voting. And that is a right that people, men and women, have died for to protect. And the Republicans know what's going on. They've had other states where they've seen the data that when you put roadblocks in front of people to vote, such as the voter ID, that it absolutely tampers with their rights, and it absolutely reduces the numbers of people who are able to vote. And that is criminal to me. Moving forward, I appreciate that the courts in the state of Iowa put an injunction against most of the pieces of the voter suppression bill that was passed in the state of Iowa. Some of those pieces, making it harder for people to vote early, making it harder for people to vote at home, making it harder for people to vote at the polls on election day. They were putting up roadblocks. Most of those things got taken away by the injunction, but it's going to go to the Iowa legislature possibly in the next year. And so what kind of government do you want? Do you want a government that puts up roadblocks to people's rights that we have, or do you want a government that makes it as accessible as possible? The fraud and fraudulent voter piece, we've had such a low percentage of people who are trying to fraudulently vote in the state of Iowa. They spent millions of taxpayer dollars on a witch hunt for 2 or 3 people who accidentally voted wrong.
Ms. Running-Marquardt, we must move on to our next question.
Get me all excited.
Our next question is about felon voting rights. Iowa is one of only 3 states in the union that permanently takes away a convicted felon's right to vote. What would you do, if anything, about restoring voting rights to felons? We'll start with Ms. Running-Marquardt.
Not only would I look at restoring felons' voting rights, but unfortunately, there were previous administrations, governor's offices, that gave people back their rights, and then Branstad came in and said no for these certain time periods. So you have certain time periods of people who were felons in certain areas, and so what happens is they added more confusion for people. Do you have the rights back or not? And that is very unfortunate, because you have this much publicized witch hunt I was just talking about earlier for people who wanted to exercise their rights to vote. So the first thing that, especially in this area, that I would be interested in is making it clear who currently, if you have a felon who currently has the right to vote and who does not, and then from there, working with, not only across the aisle, but working with the governor's office on trying to find ways that people can recover their rights, and a right to vote is one of those things.
Thank you.
That I would be willing to work with the governor's office on.
Mr. Henderson.
I think I hit on this earlier. Giving people back their right to vote would allow them another opportunity within the community. That'd be that second chance that I was talking about earlier. They'd feel like they're a part of the community. As soon as they're done serving their time, we're punishing them again by keeping their rights to vote away. They've already served their time. They've done their probation. They've paid their restitution. Why punish them anymore? As soon as everything's done, it should automatically be given back, period. Not petition the governor just to get your rights back. I didn't have to do that the minute I turned 18. Miss Running-Marquardt didn't. I'm pretty sure you guys didn't have to do it. So why them? What's any different? They've already served their time. It's done. Slate's clean. Come back in. Here's your second chance. Go.
Thank you. We'll start with you, Mr. Henderson, for this one. Communication. What can you do to continue communication with your district after you are elected or re-elected, as the case may be?
Hold town hall meetings as often as possible. The only way that I can do anything at the state level, I can have my opinions all day long. I'm not going up there to represent myself. I'm going up there to represent you guys. That's it. That's all it is. I can come up with some good ideas, but I can't, as the Marine Corps has taught me, even good leaders listen to other people, take their ideas, use them, and give them the credit. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Running-Marquardt, communication.
Communication, I think that's an incredibly important piece. Sometimes it's not always easy to get people who care about issues to communicate to you, throughout the year. But I've tried to hold, not only in sort of downtown or southwest side of Cedar Rapids, listening posts, also in Fairfax, try to hold listening posts. People don't always publicize them because they're not, the real exciting, sexy thing, that meeting somebody wants to go to. But I also go and meet with people in their homes often, or we'll go to a coffee shop. As a legislator, you don't get your own office, so you go where you can. Here at the library, I've met with many people, not only on helping them filling out Medicaid forms, working with the MCOs. I not only try on social media, but email communication, and then also a phone call as well. And I think not only door knocking on campaign years, but also meeting face to face with people often who have communication barriers themselves, and making sure that they have fair access to those who represent them. It's always something we can all do better on. I often send handwritten notes to thousands of people in my district every year. Maybe not just wishing them a happy birthday, but also saying, hey, I'm here as your state legislator. Please consider connecting with me if there's ever anything I can do to make state government work better for you, or what I could do for you. And, it's sort of being there for people and being responsive as well. And those are things I try to do as much as possible. The constituency services, where I have a lot of people who have issues with different pieces of state government, and sometimes it's not with state government, sometimes it's the city or the federal level. And when I can connect that and make government work for people, that is probably the best part of my job.
Thank you. Let's ask this related question. How do you prefer for your constituents to communicate with you, Ms. Running-Marquardt?
Phone call, email, text. I get messages from every different sort of platform, or texting me, or emails. I even had somebody on LinkedIn once send me a couple different things. So I guess texting or emailing or phone call is, but I really prefer face-to-face as well. I do my best work that way with people, and trying to see where we can make things work and where we can find solutions to problems together.
Thank you. Mr. Henderson, what would you prefer?
Prefer face-to-face. We could meet anywhere. I met with Kirsten last year,
at Starbucks.
Other than that, I mean, phone call, text message, email, Facebook, anything. I'm a part of 22 No More, so I'm used to getting like phone calls about veterans talking about suicide and everything else at like 2 o'clock in the morning. So usually getting phone calls around that time too. So wouldn't be any different.
Thank you. Bipartisanship, a topic we hear a lot about these days. What would you do to make legislation happen regarding opinions that perhaps are different from yours, or how would you just work toward and within bipartisanship, Mr. Henderson?
One of the things the military has taught us, the U.S. military is the best fighting force in the world. That's not due to the weapons that we have. It's due to that you can grab every race, religion, creed, no matter what, we're going to work as a team to complete the mission. That's what we should be doing at the state, local, and federal levels in government. Honestly, they need to be I think I could bring in more communication, trying to figure out where we can meet onto the middle ground. Even if it's ideas that I don't like, coming up with ideas that might seem around the same area. And like I said, meeting in the middle. It's not about us up at the state level, it's about all Iowans. It's not just the Republicans or Democrats or Libertarians or the Independents, it's all Iowans.
Thank you. Ms. Running-Marquardt.
Thank you for this question. I have a proven track record of many years of getting pieces of legislation through or language itself on many different bills. And that only has happened in a bipartisan manner. It's about the relationships that you build with people and also the willingness to communicate and work with others when they come from a very different place than you come from. When they see the world very differently than you do. And I think, you start where you can connect with people first. And sometimes that is, they ran for office as well to make Iowa a better place. And that better place may look different to them than it does to me, but at least it's something that we can start with and move forward and have a comfortable conversation about. I don't care for name calling. I don't think people are stupid because they see the world differently than I do. But I have many bills, not only when I first got up to the Iowa legislature did I work hard on flood recovery bills to help our area, but also workforce development bills to make it fair for Iowans to get ahead and better themselves. There's been other bills, economic development, smart and fair economic development, workforce development, and public health have been issues that I have worked very hard in. Not only in the budgets that I have worked on, but also in areas, the no shaming children who don't have enough money for lunch or their parents didn't have enough money for lunch. That was my language. EpiPen legislation, allowing schools, and I negotiated with the pharmaceutical companies to have free EpiPens in the school districts where our children go to school and our nurses are able to administer them if a child has their first initial reaction emergency. There's been other things that I've done.
We probably need to stop there.
Thank you.
This question is about collective bargaining. What would your stance be on potential legislation to reverse the ban on project labor agreements and lease purchase agreements? What is your position on collective bargaining, Ms. Running-Marquardt?
I think, are you asking,
Your position.
I get my position on it, but are you asking me about the changes that were made?
What is your stance?
Okay.
So what is your?
So I believe that, workers' rights in the workforce and that collective bargaining is that those rights. And, those started when we had Republicans and Democrats who sat down and they said, our teachers are going on strike, and this was a long time ago, started in Burlington. And they sat down and they said, we need to find a solution, something that's fair and reasonable, so workers had a voice at the table. And so they worked together to come up with collective bargaining agreements and language in the Iowa Code, Chapter 20. Unfortunately, this last legislative session, 2 years ago now, the Republicans came in and gutted collective bargaining for our public workers. What ends up happening is, when you think about the people who are in the corrections department or the judicial department, it is not giving them a voice at the table. They don't have the same rights to come to talk about safety at the bargaining table. It also works to talk about people's quality of life and what that means, what the contract means, and what that means when you have a voice with your employer. And, if the state of Iowa wants to continue its attack on its workers, I think it's moving in the wrong direction. We should appreciate the public sector workers who sometimes give their lives or dedicate their lives to making our state a better place, whether that's educating them, protecting them, or making our streets safe to drive in the wintertime. Those people have value, and unfortunately, there were those that I worked with that did not see that. PLAs, I was the Democratic lead trying to fight against removal of public PLAs, and then also the recent project lease agreements, which they tried to get rid of here in the state of Iowa. Those are the PLAs, and the project lease agreements are very important, and they are tools so that we can have local people work on projects funded by not Cedar Rapidians only, but people of the state of Iowa. And it's growing our economy at the same time. Thank you. I went a little bit over.
Mr. Henderson.
Could you just repeat the question again, please?
Sure. The question is, what is your stance on potential legislation to reverse the ban on project labor agreements and lease purchase agreements? And this person has labeled the entire topic collective bargaining.
Well, in the aspects of collective bargaining, safety is a huge issue, especially for me. Law enforcement, any state employee should have a right to go up and talk to their boss and tell them, hey, we're having issues with this safety without repercussion. I'm not going to work here if this isn't fixed. Everybody else is able to do it. The only one that's not able to do it is obviously somebody that's signed a contract. That's the military. But the military is all about safety. Honestly, collective bargaining it needs to be brought back. It's gotten to the point to where it's gotten a little out of hand. I think 2 months ago it was a really big safety issue. 4 officers were assaulted at a correctional facility. And one of them happened to have been my buddy. So the other one I couldn't answer.
All right, well, let's move on. We are actually to the time where we need to move into closing statements. And Ms. Running-Marquardt went first for opening statements. So Mr. Henderson, we will ask you to go first for your closing statement. 2 minutes, please.
First off, thank you guys for showing up, for those of you that did. This is my first time running. Learning a lot. And I'll tell you right now, this journey is nothing compared to military time. So basically, a lot of this has to do based off of how I feel and everything what I've been saying when it comes to the voting rights being brought back to the felons, using medical marijuana for K through 12, legalizing marijuana, and using those tax proceeds for funding programs for college education. Those are things that I'm going to stand by. And honestly, the military might not like it, because that's one of the things that they really stand by, is they try to get kids in by the college education. That's kind of how they got me. But term limits, that's another one. I think we can set our own for the federal, state level.
Are you finished?
Yep.
Thank you. Ms. Running-Marquardt, 2 minutes.
Thank you. I want to thank again the League of Women Voters for putting on this forum. There were, not only you can see on Facebook all the events, but all the other things that I was messaged for that were being held tonight. And you all here in the audience, and maybe those who run through the tape again or are watching on video, I appreciate the time. This is what democracy looks like, exchange of issues and ideas. And I really appreciate the time that you took tonight. It says a lot about not only your organization, but the people who are here tonight. You know, the service that I have given to the state of Iowa, I'm very proud of. I work hard to make sure that I'm representing all of the people in House District 69. People not only in the Capitol, but around the state know that my heart is here in Lynn County. And I'm very passionate to not only defend, but also work in offense to make sure that people here, Iowans, have the opportunity for a quality education, that when they're sick they have the ability to go to the doctor's office, that they have opportunities to get a good job, and to be able to pay for food on their children's table. And I hope that the people that I've represented in House District 69 will consider voting for me again. And you know, if looking back at some of the pieces of legislation that I have passed, and I remember there was a gentleman when I first arrived, and he said, you're not going to have your name on any monument or anything when you leave here, but what you will have is the words that you've placed in code. And when I look back and think about the pieces of language that I've been able to pass that are in the Iowa Code, those things have made a difference in people's lives. And I hope that I have the opportunity to move forward and to continue that and to bring a better, higher quality of life to people of Iowa. Thank you.
Thank you. Fortunately, we were able to cover every topic of question that we received tonight. Perhaps not every exact question, but certainly every topic. Our candidates may be able to have a little time after the forum if you have any more specific questions. I would like to thank Ladd Library for making this facility available to us tonight. And I would like to thank our candidates. Running for office is a noble thing to do, a difficult thing to do, and we very much appreciate people who make room in their lives to do that. Maybe a perspective our culture has been losing a little bit lately. So thank you very much for your time and your effort, and thank you all for coming tonight.